Welcome to the Me and Money podcast, where your hosts and certified financial planners, Matt Fizell and Elliott Appel, share their thoughts on hot topics, important concepts, and real-life stories in personal finance. Hear from Matt and Elliott as they share lessons learned in their own financial journeys and those they've witnessed throughout their careers while helping clients. Have a question you'd like to hear discussed on a future episode of the podcast? You can reach out to Matt or Elliott or drop your question at the link listed in the show notes. Before we get to the episode, we'd like to remind you that while both Matt and Elliott are financial planners, they are not your financial planner, and this podcast is only intended for educational purposes. For full disclosures, please be sure to listen to the end of the episode or check out the show notes on your favorite podcast platform. Now, on to the show with your hosts, Matt Fizell and Elliott Appel.
Welcome back to another episode of the Me and Money podcast. For those of you who have stuck with us through the estate planning marathon, bless your souls and go get those estate planning. Go get those estate planning documents done. But we're here today to talk about just a topic that I know Elliott and I have had conversations about. I've been having it with other financial planners recently, just with some of the economic turmoil, like layoffs being a bit more of a thing, inflation and living expenses being just maybe more pressing or feeling like they're high just over the past few years. And so we're going to talk about liquidity today, which is a jargony term that every time I say it to a new client, I'm like, gosh, I should not say that because their eyes just roll and they're like, what the hell is that? So that's what we're going to talk about today. Elliott, why don't you just kick us off with like a simple term definition of liquidity?
Let's see if I can do a simple term definition. I would say it's having cash or readily available cash for whatever it might be. Do you want to change it?
I would just add, or things that can easily be converted to cash. Not necessarily that we would want to in all situations, but one thing we were talking about before we hit record today was just the option to be able to use your money and why that is almost, well, not always, but most of the times worth the cost of the opportunity cost, shall we say.
Yeah. Do you want to expand on that opportunity cost and what that means?
Yeah. So for full transparency, I know longtime listeners, right? I have a lot less stuff behind me on the wall. Like, we're in the process of trying to sell our house. And for those of you listening, you're probably like, oh, like what the heck's wrong with your house? Because like the housing market's red hot, right? But there's also like 30% more inventory in our part of town than there was last year. So it's just like the housing market is shifting a bit. And so what made me think about this topic today is we're in a position where we don't need to sell our house, but we want to sell our house. And I think sometimes, especially if we think back to like 2008, 2009, there were a lot of people who did not have like the ability to stay in their house because they needed the cash or the equity, or they needed to get rid of the liability with that payment, right? Yeah. And were forced to sell their house, right? So there's like forced liquidity too. So I guess all I'm getting at is, right, with the fact that we have like a fully stocked emergency fund and we have cash on hand to do the things that we need to do, we're not in like a rush. And that's because we're liquid, even though a substantial point of our net worth is stashed in the house too and is not so accessible. So that's where I was coming from in coming up with this topic.
And you hit on emergency fund, and I want to spend a little bit of time there, Matt, just because I think people underestimate the importance of an emergency fund and how much of an emergency fund can be helpful. I know some people are like, hey, I'm going to have 2 months. And there's a difference between, hey, I'm going to have 2 months because that's all I can afford to have saved up, rather than I have plenty of money. I'm just choosing to keep it at 2 months. And I'm going to put it in illiquid assets or something else. Those are two different situations. I just want to call that out. But I tend to live more in the world of I'm going to keep a very small emergency fund, even though I could have a bigger one. And I think a lot of times that's a mistake. We talked about opportunity costs, that, money at the bank, money in a CD, money market fund, whatever we want to talk about. None of these are recommendations, but just places that people traditionally might keep an emergency fund. And maybe they go invest that or something else instead in the stock market, which fluctuates a lot. Obviously, you're probably going to earn less in the money market fund or the CD or the bank account. There's an opportunity cost to that. But when we talk about layoffs, for example, right? Lots of layoffs going around. I was looking at a statistic where it was taking a lot longer for people to get jobs now. Think about people who sent out hundreds of interviews or resumes, gotten some interviews, exhausted their network, all of that, and still can't find a job. And it's 6-8 months later. Well, if you have a 2-month emergency fund, and that was by choice, you're going to be forced, and stocks have done okay. So to sell off some stocks, probably it's been okay, but there's been other periods of time where stocks haven't done as well, and you're forced to sell that as low or make other decisions. And I think that's where you started to talk a little bit about the flexibility and sort of not having to make a choice, but you can choose other options because you have that liquidity.
Yeah. And I'm going to push a little bit on, I like where you're going with the stocks, right? Because everyone loves to see, big number get bigger, right? But even if you've done well in the market, let's say you invested like at the bottom of 2020, right? And you've just been riding this, never ending upwards to the right roller coaster that we've seemed to be on. But even if it goes down 20% next year and you're still up a good amount, it's still going to hurt to have seen that you just had 20% more. Sure. Right. And so I think that's like something that's not talked about enough, quite honestly, because the gains are great, but we all know that the losses tend to hurt a lot more than the gains make us happy. And I think there'd still be some like liquidity remorse, if that's what we're going to call it, where, I could have, I could have sold last month and put that money into cash and I'd be feeling fine. Right. Yeah,
definitely. Emotionally, it feels different taking it from a bank account than it does a brokerage account.
Oh, for sure. Even if the result is the same, right?
Even if the result is the same. We see that in the people that we work with and just personally too. And so I think that's important to keep in mind, that if it's the liquidity is helpful during those times where you can just pull it and it feels less guilty, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think too, like going back to, kind of our house selling situation, like we could cut the price and probably get out of here faster, but we don't want to do that, right? Like it's not necessarily a requirement that we do that, because we don't need to sell the house because we have the cash on hand and the things in the places where they need to be, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. Like it's just one of those things too, where when I think of like hard times that either I've gone through or I've seen clients go through, a lot of times it's not like, 15% increase on my brokerage account is going to really help out right now. It's more like, geez, if I had $10,000 in the bank, like that would be more than enough to help whatever, right? I know you just said you had some house bills that came up unexpected, right? Where you replaced a water heater.
Yeah. And it was more than I anticipated for that. So it's just one of those things where it wasn't great. I didn't love paying it. I'm glad it's done. I'm glad there was money in the bank to cover it. But now I have to build up that fund again, right? Because I didn't exhaust it, but it's depleted a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. So when we think about I like to talk to my clients about liquidity traps. Like, what are some things that maybe you see either with your clients or just in a Reddit? Personal finance is always a great place to go see some interesting scenarios out there. But when you think about the word liquidity trap, like what are some things that come to mind that people should be thinking about?
Yeah. I'm going to say something, but steer me in a different direction if this isn't what you're intending, because I'm not quite sure where we're going with this. But I think liquidity trap I think this money's actually liquid, or it's easy to get to, or that scenario is not going to happen. So I don't really need to worry about the liquidity to begin with. So I think about the people that are like, hey, what if I put my emergency fund in like half stocks, half bonds? That's what immediately comes to mind for me of like markets up more often than not, or they go all the way to the wall, 100% stocks. It's like markets up more often than not. Doesn't matter. I'm just going to do that. That's what comes to mind for me. And then you have a confluence of factors that come together, like a job loss, still have to pay the mortgage, and the stock market's down at this point, and we don't have an emergency fund. So now it's, how am I going to pay my bills? How am I going to get a job? Do I need to sell my stocks? When do I need to sell my stocks? Oh, it's down. Should I wait for it to go back up? That's what comes to mind.
Yeah, no, I think that's great, right? Because you can convert those funds, right, the stocks and bonds, into cash, right? It appears that you have liquidity, but you're at the risk of volatility in that sense, right? And I guess where I was going to go with it is, a lot of people think that their house is a liquid asset. It can be, right? However, it's kind of the same crisis that you're running into with your brokerage account if it just went down 10 or 15%, except this time you're going to be paying 7, 8, maybe 9% on, even higher on a HELOC, definitely higher on a credit card if you're going to go that route. So it's just one of those things where, the question I always ask is, if someone's house was priced as a market price every day, would they view it differently? Because a lot of the things I hear is, oh, it's a good investment. It's my house. It's the best investment. So I should put a bunch of money in. And I don't know, like, it's going to sound crazy, but even with like interest rates as high as they are, like, I don't think being super aggressive on a down payment is something you should do if you don't have a ton of liquidity, right? Because you're just going to, and on a brand new house, you're not really going to be tapping that for a HELOC, right? So it's like, I don't know. Yeah, you can save some interest. However, if you don't have money to pay the bills and now you need to take out a credit card or whatever else, right? Is that better? Like, I don't think so.
Yeah, that's about trade-offs. And you brought up HELOC, and I think that's another like liquidity trap, and one I still recommend to folks. I like having HELOCs on homes, even if you're not going to use it. I've had one set up on a property that I have just because I wanted it there in case. But we also saw during the financial crisis, unused home equity line of credits got closed down because banks weren't willing to take that risk anymore. So a source that you thought was liquid and available all of a sudden wasn't. So I think it's one of those things where it's nice to have. Maybe you can count on it somewhat, but I wouldn't count on it maybe in the worst case scenario. That can also be a liquidity trap for me.
Yeah. And I just see this a lot like with the maximizers, like, and that's something I'm very tuned in on. Like, I just, it's fascinating to me, like how people approach everything. But, in some cases where I have like a cash flow constrained client, or like maybe they are going through some job search or whatever, it's like, look, I know paying interest sucks. Like, I hate it just as much as the next guy. But what if instead we just look at that as like a premium you're paying to have your cash flow, right? Like, because at the end of the day, where people feel the most constrained is in the day to day or the week to week or the paycheck to paycheck, where it's like, I don't know if I'm going to have enough money to pay this thing next month, right? That's like the biggest financial stress causer, in my opinion. Yeah. So
where do you see that?
It's just interesting.
I like that framing of it's the premium you pay for the liquidity or the cash flow. Like, what do you see them paying interest in, and sort of how do you guide around that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's even if you have enough money to pay off your mortgage, but maybe you also have things you want to go do, right? Like, that's probably not necessarily like the paycheck to paycheck scenario that I just played out. But, if you have, equal amounts, let's say you have $100,000 left on your mortgage, and even if it's just sitting in a high yield savings account and earning 3 versus, let's say worst case, like 6 or 7 on your mortgage, right? It's like, well, yeah, but there's things you want to go do in the next year or two, and there's not necessarily going to be another sum of money coming to do that thing. Is it really that bad if you pay a little bit more of mortgage interest, but you get to go do the thing that you wanted to do.
Gotcha.
Or
Yeah.
if you do lose your job, you're not going to be like sweating about what you do in the meantime, or that means we won't have to touch your investments if they go down 20% in value next year. Like, I don't know. I think it's just a very interesting thing, no pun intended there, where I feel like a lot of people have like this burning desire to put all their money into, let's just call it in a liquid asset as a house, or pay off the car, which, geez, depreciating asset, right? I don't know. It's just an interesting thing. And a lot of times once they understand the concept of being liquid and being able to have some financial flexibility when the thing happens that we, like you said, don't expect to happen.
Yeah.
I think it's a really valuable thing.
Definitely. I think it's the liquidity represents freedom and flexibility to make the decisions you want to have in your life without it.
Didn't you start with that definition, Elliott? That was beautiful.
I'm not sure I can even repeat it now, but it goes back to the idea that if you don't have liquidity, you may be forced to make a decision you don't want to make at whatever time. And that, I think people underestimate that freedom and that flexibility that it represents as they're maybe trying to maximize other things, right? You read threads online, you go meet with maybe even an advisor who says like, let's maximize this to the extent possible, but you might not be a maximizer yourself. I'm not in every aspect of life either. I like simplicity and I like flexibility and freedom when it comes to it, and not being forced to make decisions because of these outside influences. I can say, hey, I don't have to make that choice right now. I can choose to do it later or not at all.
Right. And I think that's kind of what I'm driving at, right? You just said it, like, I can make that decision later. Like, you could, I think especially now where we sit in this, I don't even know if we can call this an economic cycle. Like, I don't know. Like, we're kind of we've been in uncharted territory for the last 5 years, right? So it's like, we could always go and pay that mortgage off. Let's say we go and pay it off 2 years from now because, the wand gets waved and all this uncertainty is gone, right? Are you really going to like be upset that you paid 2 more years of mortgage interest? Probably not. Whereas if you go and sink all that money into the house and then 2 years later we have to go take out a HELOC at who knows, right?
There's going to be some
allegedly rates are going to go down. I guess this will be released post-Fed, so maybe we'll see. But it's just one of those things where I feel like people sign themselves up to like the worst possible outcome of the maximization before they even know what the worst possible outcome could be.
Yeah. There's a lot of behavior in that to be studied.
Yeah. So it's just been fascinating. And I've just seen it a lot where, like having your house paid off in retirement, great thing if you have other assets on your balance sheet. If your house is your only asset that's driving that net worth, and I've seen it, it's like, well, I don't know. Like, I'd almost prefer you save for retirement instead of pay off your mortgage, because that trip you want to take when you retire, like, you can write checks from your house, but it's pretty expensive right now to do that.
Yeah, you have limited options, whether that's a cash out refi, a HELOC, or a reverse home equity loan.
Yeah, and those are all things where like people hear them and they get terrified of it, right?
Typically.
Yeah. I was generalizing for sure, but yeah. That I'm curious though too, like, on a lot of what we've been talking about is just, it's kind of that unknown, like, and you said you like simplicity and flexibility. So when you're thinking about it yourself, like, what are some ways you actually deploy this in your own personal finances?
I mean, we talked about it, but just the cash on hand. I have more cash on hand than most people would recommend generally. And that gives me freedom and peace of mind, because I know if the market goes down, I'm okay for the foreseeable future. Or if I do have a home repair that's 4 times the cost of what I thought it was going to be, I can write the check for it. I don't enjoy it again, but I can do that without feeling like, oh, I got to go sell these assets, or I got to figure out what I want to sell. What are the tax consequences? All of that. It's just simple. Mm-hmm. It's a check. and I can move on with my life. I can complain about it a lot, but I can move on with my life.
Yeah. When complaining, right? That's like a hindsight thing. Like maybe you won't complain.
Yeah. I mean, it's certainly less of a complaint than, oh, shoot, where am I going to get the money from? Or I need to go borrow it or do something like that.
Or take it out of your retirement or whatever. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Do you have ways that it shows up for you?
I just think back to like the past 4 years of starting the firm. Like, again, I think we both were there where it's just like, oh, we didn't save for retirement the first year of our business. It's like, that's the most non-financial planner thing to do. But it all goes back to what you're optimizing for, right? Like if you're starting a business, right, you may be optimizing for something that's going to allow you to do what you do for a longer period of time. Like, I don't think I could work until 65 in my last job, but I think I could work beyond 65 in my current job. So it's like,
yeah,
I needed the liquidity though, to make sure that the business can get to where it needs to be. Like, I guess I'm also using it in the context of our house. Like, I have more cash on hand because like, I know we're going to have some big repair bills if we have to stay here. Right. But it's like, I'd rather just know that I can cover those expenses versus dumping even more into my retirement, if that makes sense. Like, even though that money's still there and it can still go to an investing goal at some point, but like understanding when you may need liquidity is something that is either really hard to understand or I think people just don't bother to think about.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
It does. You brought up a point, and I'm not sure if this is going to make sense in a way that I can convey it well, but I think there's also this liquidity of time. And bear with me here for a second to see if I can explain this.
I'm intrigued.
But I have found, I've worked with a lot of different folks over my career so far, just because of my last firm. I saw a lot of different scenarios. And it seemed to be that the people have had control over their time, and it was liquid. So they had a lot of control over what they wanted to do, how they worked, when they worked, who they worked with. We're much more, call it comfortable in life, not just financially. That was a piece of it, but also just, hey, I can go to my kid's soccer match, or I can take my family camping this weekend. I don't have to be on that sales call or that all hands meeting at this big, large tech company, as an example. These people often own businesses in a way, and it wasn't always this way. They grinded for a long time, but they got it to a place where they had a better structure, or they had sold a business, or they just had a good job with very good boundaries that they were able to set to be able to do that. And I think that that's something that is hard to do. I don't think everybody can do it. And I don't know. I don't have a roadmap to sell you to get there either. I think it's one of those things that is really hard to figure out internally. But as you were talking, Matt, that's what I heard of, like, hey, I can't do the previous job past or 265, right? For me, that was an absence of liquidity and time in the way that you worked. But my new job, I can do that past 65, I think, because I have more liquidity over my time and other things that I'm doing.
And that's really interesting because I think a lot of people, I think financial lack of liquidity constrains people's ability to have time liquidity.
100%.
Because you get to the point, and it's lifestyle creep, right? Like, lifestyle creep is kind of I don't know if I'd call it a liquidity trap, but it's certainly a barrier to time liquidity, right?
Yeah.
Where if you need to take that promotion in order to feel liquid at home, then you've just given up your time, right? Like, or your sustainability of your job. I really like where you're going with that. I think that's an interesting framework you got going there.
I think it's an important one, and it's a hard one to conceptualize. It's a hard one to explain. I'm still trying to figure out how to verbalize it, but I've known, like we've talked about the financial constraints. I've also known people who didn't have great amounts of wealth, right? They didn't sell a business. They didn't do that, but they had control over their time and life was good for them. So I think that's as you think about lifestyle creep, you think about the life that you want to have and what financial resources it takes, think about what trade-off you're willing to make between time and money and the liquidity of both. Because in my experience, it's right. If you have a lot of financial liquidity, you may have a lot less time liquidity if you're in your working years. Retirement's a different beast in of itself, because you're giving up a lot of that time. You have to do these things that other people require of you to make that income. If you don't set it up in a way where you have boundaries, you can do all those things. There's exceptions to it, but that's been my experiences. It's kind of a teeter-totter, if you will. Yeah.
Well, I think another good example of that's starting to blow up quite a bit is like the whole buy now, pay later thing, right? Like,
oh yeah,
right. Their whole design is like to keep you more liquid, right? Like rather than spending $1,000 at once, they're saying, oh, well, you can just spend $100 a month for the next 10 months. But when you start stacking those up, now you have $1,000 a month of payments.
It's a future claim on your time.
Want, right? But that is like it's an interesting downside to liquidity, right? It keeps you more flexible, and when you have flexibility, like you can go down an even worse path, right? Like, because the rails have kind of been widened on the road, so to speak. And so, yeah, that is interesting to think about. But
sometimes those restrictions or rails put in place are helpful. And I think here in Madison's actually I'll relate this to driving here. There are certain roads that are 25 miles per hour, but are built in a way that you can go 50 miles per hour very easily.
Yeah.
Right. And then there are other roads with sidewalks very close by or trees or that sort of thing that keeps you actually going 25 miles per hour, and the road bends. It's not just straight. So I think that's a good sort of thing to keep in mind with those buy now, pay laters, or more availability, more features, more everything. Sometimes it isn't for the best.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually knew a really random fact, but I knew a city planner, and like he said, people will go as fast as you build the road to allow them to go. And there's a lot of data out there to suggest, like even here in Madison, when they added that flex lane to the belt line, and for those of you not in Madison, it's like the worst traffic situation in Madison. But they added a lane, and now like speeding has increased like 30% since they added another lane to that road, like, which creates more dangerous driving. That is interesting. I never really thought about it until you explained it that way. But I guess there are some other cons to liquidity in the wrong context, right?
Yeah.
But I also wanted to end with a fairly wealthy person that I know, and he said, I don't really like buying expensive things, but the thought of knowing that I could is most of the value. And that like really resonated with me and stuck with me, where it's not so much like just because you have the money, you're going to go spend it, but knowing that you could is where we get a lot of our comfort and security from. So I just think that's a good place to end it, and understand that, look, we're not saying it's bad to pay off a mortgage or it's bad to invest aggressively for retirement, but it has to be within the boundaries of what your cash needs are going to be, right? Because if you disrupt those investments in order to pay your bills, it could not be a problem, or it could be one of the biggest financial mistakes that you make of your whole life and ruin decades of hard work.
That's a good way to end it.
All right. Well, we'll end it up there. Thanks for playing along, Elliott. And I'm really going to be dwelling on your time liquidity. I like that a lot.
Maybe we'll do some more with that later.
All right. Sounds good. See ya.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Me and Money podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show. Have a question you'd like to suggest for a future episode? Drop Matt or Elliott a question at their email, or use the linked form in the show notes. Like what you heard? It would be a tremendous help to us in our mission of having real conversations about personal finance by leaving us a review on your favorite podcast app. A few words can go a long way in connecting those looking for content like ours on their app of choice. You can also support the show by liking, sharing, and subscribing. Thanks again for listening, and be on the lookout for future episodes soon.
The Me and Money podcast is hosted and produced by Harmony Outsourcing Services LLC. Matt Fizell is an investment advisor representative of Harmony Wealth LLC. Elliott Appel is an investment advisor representative of Kindness Financial Planning LLC. However, the views and opinions expressed by Matt and Elliott in this podcast are not intended as individualized investment advice on behalf of Harmony or Kindness, or as tax, accounting, or legal advice. Although we gather information from sources that we deem to be reliable, we cannot guarantee the accuracy, timeliness, or completeness of any information prepared by any unaffiliated third party. When specific investments or types of investments are mentioned, such mention is not intended to be a recommendation or endorsement to buy or sell the specific investment. Harmony is a registered investment advisor authorized to do business in the states of Wisconsin and Texas and other jurisdictions where exempted. Kindness is a registered investment advisor authorized to do business in Wisconsin and Washington and in other jurisdictions where exempted. Registration as a registered investment advisor does not imply a certain level of skill or training. This website contains links to the Harmony and Kindness websites that provide general information about the advisory services offered by Harmony and Kindness. These links are provided as a convenience only. Harmony and Kindness can only provide individualized services after you sign an agreement and receive required disclosures. Users of this website may, but are not required to, engage the services of Harmony or Kindness for advisory services. Please remember that all investments involve varying degrees of risk, and the future performance of any specific investment or investment strategy is not guaranteed to be profitable or equal to any historical performances. As a final note, we'd encourage you to reach out to your financial professionals before implementing any of the strategies or concepts discussed in this podcast. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.